Hi, everybody. This is Erik Peterson with the Afterschool Alliance. Thank you all for thank you to Aaron and Linda for hosting me today to talk a little bit about advocating for after school, and thanks for taking the time. We have about an hour or so I'll have a couple of slides that we'll get through, and then hopefully we can have questions and discussion, because I know we have a small group, so I want to make sure that this is relevant to you, and if you have specific questions on what you can and can't do in terms of reaching out to elected officials, what constitutes advocacy versus lobbying, what's allowed, and what kind of funds you can use for those different things. I know sometimes those are sticky individual issues or questions, and I want to make sure that everyone at least kind of understands what they can do, when, and to who. So that's kind of the goal. But I also, before we get through there, I think hopefully most of you, now, before I could advance, but now I can't advance. There we go. Most of you, I think, know the Afterschool Alliance at the national level, based here in Washington, D.C., which is where I'm based. We work with the Wyoming Afterschool Alliance and 49 other statewide afterschool networks, doing policy, research, field building, communications, and hoping one of the projects that we work on is Lights on After School, and hoping that you all will once again celebrate that at the Wyoming Afterschool Alliance Conference in early October, but also in your own programs sometime throughout the month of October. In terms of what we're going to cover today, just a little bit, this will be review because you all are, I think, big supporters and advocates of after school already, but a little bit on why advocate and raise awareness for after school, sort of why does it matter, and then where we are in the current federal funding process, and sort of what's next, and then we'll get into sort of those ins and outs of advocacy and education, and what works and what may work better for you and what might not, or for depending on your program and what your funding source is, and then a couple of suggestions, ideas to do this month and later this fall as well. So starting out with why advocate for after school, I guess, I'll pause there and make sure that works for everybody, or if anyone else has any suggestions for other things that they want to have covered. Okay. And I know we're a small group, so I think everyone's phones are live, so you can mute if you want, but feel free also to chime in and sort of virtually raise your hand and ask a question throughout, because it's a small enough group that we should be able to do that. No worries. So after-school programs obviously benefit children, family, communities, and it's key to raise our voices because really there's this scarcity of public and private investment. So particularly in a state like Wyoming, where the bridges funding, so state funding that was more available and accessible in the past is less so now, and also at the federal level, the funding pot has just gotten smaller as the federal debt has increased, and as Congress has passed things like the Budget Control Act of 2011, which put federal spending caps, so levels or ceilings on what can be spent for defense and for non-defense every year. And so that just makes it kind of results in the situation where programs are essentially pitted against each other, and policymakers and their staff have to make really hard decisions, like do we fund education programs like Title I, do we fund things like after school and 21st century community learning centers and child care funding, or do we fund things like the National Institutes for Health and sort of cancer research and many of the other programs out there, national parks, as non-defense discretionary. So they're all in the same bucket. So it makes a really difficult situation for folks having to make those decisions, and there is advocacy going on to try to address those levels and limits and raise the caps so that those decisions are not as hard. But until that comes to pass, we're in this situation. And so while all those other things are important as well, it's also important to raise our voices to say, look, when you're making these decisions, this is why after school matters. This is what the return on investment is. This is the strong positive outcomes and impact that's going on, for our students, for our families, and for our community, and why when you're making those tough decisions, you should, firmly consider this for an investment at the federal level. Because if you don't make that case, if we don't make that case as believers in after school, nobody else is going to. So that's the short answer as to the why. But also just as a reminder that there is lots of data that backs up those assertions. So we know that after school helps narrow the achievement gap. This is hopefully familiar to most of you all, research from University of California professor Deborah Vandal from 2013, where you can see low-income students with access to after school during kindergarten through 5th grade narrowed the achievement gap that exists between them and middle and upper income students. Additionally, the Durlak and Weisberg data we like to point to from 2010, published in the American Journal of Community Psychology, that talks about the attendance behavior and core academics being positively impacted by after-school programs. So school day attendance, behavior in the classroom, and then grades in core academic subjects, all increasing as a result of programs that had that were high-quality after-school programs. And to give a sense for the impact of these and sort of the meaningful, I apologize for that siren, if you can hear that, sorry, that's DC. But the effect of aspirin on heart disease as a significant effect is 0.03. So compared to that, you can see that these are fairly significant effects based on a wide range of studies, not just one research study that shows the impact of after-school programs. And then kind of putting all this together in terms of the research is the, this kind of helpful infographic that's out there that you can use for your own materials as well. That really just shows that the research is clear that after-school programs provide building blocks that lead to student success. So whether it's social skills, work habits, thinking skills like ability to make better decisions, and also things like reading and math gains, that is almost like a stair step that programs provide those supports resulting in higher graduation rates and really just having young people ready for whatever's next after 12th grade, whether that's a 2-year college, a 4-year college, career, the military, but whatever their path is, to be successful, they're going to need those skills like teamwork, leadership, critical thinking that we know after-school programs are really good at providing, particularly in instances where young people may not be getting that so that they should be getting it at home or in a classroom setting. So that's sort of the summary of the why we advocate and the need as well as the power of after school. Any questions on that before we move on to sort of where we are with the federal funding process?
I'll interject something, Erik. The slide that Erik just showed from Deborah Vandal, we have a lot of those brochures here in the office, and if you want any to use in your local communities, I can get them to you. And of course, any of this data, I'm sure it's on the Afterschool Alliance website, and you can check our website as well for other resources.
Yes.
Or let me know what you need, and we can design something.
Perfect. Great. Thanks, Linda. Okay, so the federal funding process, hopefully this is familiar to some of you. This is how the process is supposed to work, which is a big asterisk and caveat, because we'll talk about how it actually has been working for the last 10, 15 years. But it's supposed to work where in the late winter, so really February 1st is what the Constitution says, although it's historically been, last couple of years, been late. It was very late this year. But the President proposes a budget. This year, if you recall, there was actually 2 budgets. There was this so-called skinny budget, which was a sort of a budget outline, and then the full budget that came out in March, so about a month and a half late, and then a full budget, which came out in late May. But in theory, a president proposes a budget. Then the House and the Senate, look at those sort of budget suggestions from the president, and then come up with their own separately in the budget committee. So relevant to you all for sure is that on the Senate Budget Committee, the chairman is, in fact, Senator Enzi from Wyoming. So the House and Senate Budget Committees, in theory, again, are supposed to review the president's budget and then come up with, based on their own priorities as a Senate and as a committee and as a committee chairman, what they think should be prioritized in the budget and how much big picture, so not at the program level, so not like 21st century, but the big picture, how much money should go to things like defense, non-defense, border security, education, sort of big buckets, big categories. And then once that is passed at their committee and is supposed to pass the full House and full Senate, those are so-called budget resolutions, so they don't have the impact of law, but they're more like blueprints for where the spending should happen. Then the House and Senate appropriations committees take those overarching budget sort of guidelines and come up with how much money should go to specific programs. So they're the folks that decide, okay, 21st Century Community Learning Center should have X, Title I Education Fund should have Y, Department of Interior, Parks should have X, et cetera. The House and Senate continue on their own separate track, and then in theory, those pass their relevant committees, the full floor of the House and the Senate, and then they sort of any differences between the two get reconciled in what's called a conference committee. And then they go back to the House and Senate and then to the President's desk to be signed off. That's all supposed to happen before the end of the federal fiscal year. So for the current 2017 federal fiscal year, that would be September 30th. So in reality, what has been happening instead, particularly this year, has been especially dysfunctional, unfortunately. But even the last 10 or 15 years, the House and the Senate have really struggled to pass their own budget resolutions. So this year, the House just left last Friday for August recess. So they'll be gone for 4 or 5 weeks. They did not pass a budget resolution before they left. And the Senate has yet to pass one either. They have not, the appropriations committees, though, this year have not waited for those budget resolutions, knowing that politically they would be difficult to get through. So they've gone ahead and done their own spending bills anyway without a budget resolution, which again is not the way it's supposed to work, but the way that it's working this year. The chances of an actual, what we call regular order happening, so spending bills being passed from the House and Senate, being reconciled in a conference committee and going to the President, are slim to none. It just hasn't happened really in the last 15 years. So more likely what's been happening is House and Senate appropriations committees will hash out their own individual bills. They may or may not pass their full chambers. But then there'll be sort of closed-door negotiations, and we'll end up with a continuing resolution or an so-called omnibus bill or minibus bills, and then that will determine our funding for the next fiscal year. And they have not, Congress has not been able to meet that September 30th, October 1st deadline for quite some time, so the process has gone into the fall. So we expect that to happen again, and we'll talk more about that. But in terms of where so that's the overview, where we are now. So the President's budget did, like I say, come out in March and May, the mini budget and then the full budget. As I think most folks know, 21st Century Community Learning Centers, which is the primary funding stream for after school, about 1.1, right now, 1.19 billion. That was zeroed out, proposed for elimination. So we're professional development funds through Title II for teachers. Mentoring, which is a key funding stream in a lot of communities for after school, that had a significant proposed cut. Teen pregnancy prevention, a lot of after school programs like Girls Inc. and others are able to tap into those funds. That was zeroed out. And then also some of the workforce readiness programs for teens and youth, like summer jobs funding, that was proposed for a significant cut as well. But again, it's important to realize these are proposed, and so those went to Congress. And those of you that, like I know Tamara, who's on the line, was out in D.C. in June, and if you had reached out or talked to members of Congress by phone or sent an email and got a response back, you will hear consistently from Republicans and Democrats, House and Senate, what the President proposes in his budget is dead on arrival. It doesn't mean we have to follow it. We're going to come up with our own budgets. But what that would mean, if it were to come past for 21st century, significant amount of somewhere between 1.2 and 1.7 million, depending on how you calculate it, young people would potentially lose access to programs. In Wyoming, it's probably hard to read the teeny tiny print on your screen, but in Wyoming, it's about estimated 5,400 students that get programs through 21st Century programs. So those, if the president's proposal were to come to pass, those programs would need to find other funding or close their doors. So that was the proposal. So the next step then is the House. The House has moved forward, unlike the Senate, and they did pass an appropriations bill through committee for education, labor, health, and human services in last month, so in mid to late July. While it did not eliminate 21st Century as the president proposed, it did do a significant cut. So $191 million cut is one of the largest cut that we've seen proposed besides the elimination really for the past 5 or 6 years. And it would take the program down to $1 billion, which it hasn't been in $1 billion really since like 2007. So it would be a substantial cut. It would mean about 200,000 young people would be at risk nationally for losing their programs. And then the House bill still eliminated teacher development funding, cut youth mentoring, eliminated the pregnancy prevention. So there's still a lot of cuts in here. The impact of the House bill, while it doesn't eliminate, it's still almost 200,000 young people. For Wyoming, that's about, I think, 900 something, so a little under 1,000. If you can read that number down there, 939 estimated if that House bill were to come to pass. So it's important to think through the process that we mentioned where while this has passed committee, in order for that cut to become law, it would have to pass the full House, which at this point doesn't look likely. And then the Senate, which hasn't done anything yet on spending bills, would have to pass their own bill and then eventually agree to that cut. So we don't know yet what the Senate's going to propose for their spending level for 21st Century, but the bottom line here is there's still a long way to go in this process. And if you remember the 2017 process, we were looking at $130 million cut, and we ended up in the end with a $25 million increase. So that really was a direct result of what we're talking about today with advocacy. And if folks were able to reach out this year since the proposed elimination by emails, calls, we had organizational sign-on letters. You all had a great letter in Wyoming of just Wyoming programs and leaders and thought leaders that went to the Wyoming congressional delegation and had a tremendous impact there and definitely got the attention of people like Senator Enzi and the staff. There was bipartisan Dear Colleague letters in the House and Senate, and then an outpouring of media outreach. Is just a handful of the many, many broadcast and web and print articles that came out, all sort of making the case that that these programs would have cutting these programs would have a tremendous negative impact on families and communities. So in terms of the process moving forward, let me move this out of the way. There we go. The House of Representatives adjourned for August recess last week, so they're out. The Senate is expected to adjourn either later this week is the best bet, or they have said they might be in next week as well. That remains to be seen. So it's a good time to, if you still have summer programs, I heard you guys talking on the call ahead of time that a lot of summer programs are already over. And I know your guys' school year starts pretty soon. I know August is a really hard time to do program site visits because summer programs are winding down, if not already over, and the beginning of the school year is a tough time to have a VIP or an elected official or their staff come to a program when you're just ramping up and just getting started and just signing up kids and still potentially hiring staff and just figuring out transportation, how everything's going to work. So it doesn't always fit well when you're working through that process in early to mid-August to have a member of Congress come check things out, and we totally understand that. Unfortunately, from a congressional point of view, it's the longest time during the year that they have to be home in the state and in the district. And so it works out well for them, and some of them are going to want to get out to programs if they can. But there are some other alternatives. You can, go out to their offices and meet, arrange to have some kids or parents talk to the member or the staff in their offices or elsewhere. But in terms of what's next as well, so when they come back in September, we expect the Senate to do their, that should say education spending, not education spending bill, marked up in their appropriations for subcommittee and then full committee. And then, of course, the federal fiscal year in theory ends September 31st, so that's their deadline for passing on the spending bill. Like I said, it's not likely to happen. What's more likely is a short-term continuing resolution, so basically kicking the can down the road. And they could do that for a couple weeks, for a month, through December, like they've done the last couple of years. And then having an omnibus bill or minibus. So an omnibus is one giant spending bill that has all the federal government spending in it. Minibuses break it up into 2 or 3 or 4 or more smaller bills, but not the individual 12 that it's supposed to happen in regular order. The other possibility, which is being talked about a lot, more than it has in the last couple of years, is a possible government shutdown. There are lots of sort of lines in the sand that have been drawn, unfortunately, by different folks in Congress and in the White House, saying if XYZ is not funded, like a border wall or other things aren't taken into account into a spending bill, then the president won't sign, or members of a certain party won't vote for a spending bill, which would lead to a shutdown, which hopefully would be temporary. So just lots of uncertainty, which makes it really hard for folks at a state education agency, to figure out what to do with the 21st Century funds. Do they do a new competition, a new cohort? Do they wait? And we understand that, and we convey that when we talk to appropriations and budget committee staff. That's important for this process to work as it's supposed to, so that the program can work as it's supposed to, and funds can get out to states, and states can do RFPs and do competitions, and money can get to programs. October is your all's conference, which will be a great time to meet and check in where things are. And then, of course, Lights on After School, which is a great opportunity, again, if you haven't already, to have members come out, invite folks out to your program and talk to the kids, sit in little tiny desks, and talk to parents and really get a sense for why these programs are important. Let's see here. So before we go into the ins and outs of advocacy, there we go. Any questions at this point on sort of the process and where we are?
Erik, this is Tamara. I have a question. Is the chart that showed the potential impact by state available on the Alliance website?
Yes.
Okay.
So under, if you go to our main page on the, and I might be able to bring it up. I hesitate, but I'll try. See if this works. Apologize for my messy screen here. If we do this, and then this, and then this. So this is our main website. Can you guys see that?
I think I still see the slides.
Oh, okay.
I'm not actually seeing your...
It might take a while to come up. I probably shouldn't have tried this. I'll go back. But basically, yes, if you go to the main afterschoolalliance.org, okay, there's a tab at the top that says policy. And then under that is 21st CCLC. And then under that, the impact of FY18 budget proposal and the Trump proposal. Those charts are right there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
And also, I do have that document, which I can forward out if you want.
Great. That's great. Yep, let us know anything we can send out, Linda or I or both, after the call. We can do that.
Okay, great.
Okay, so now we know why we should make our voices heard for after school, and sort of the when and the process and how it in theory will work or not work this summer and fall. And so the question is, what can we and what can't we do based on some of the laws around advocacy and lobbying? So these slides I'm using with the permission of Alliance for Justice, which is a great group that we've been working with and that the Bott Foundation has been working with, and networks around that really focuses on how can nonprofit organizations and groups that work with youth and others really use the law to get their voices heard. So they've done some great slides and resources. So advocacy is a very broad term, and not all advocacy is lobbying, so it's different, but all lobbying is advocacy, if that makes sense. So these are all examples of advocacy: educating legislators, educational conferences, encourage people to vote, or even sign them up to vote, input on regulatory efforts, voter education, organizing communities, sharing with a member of Congress or the staff how federal funds are being used, so what the program looks like, how the program works, what the impact is on young people, what the evaluations show. All of that is education and advocacy. So there's no prohibitions, and you can use federal funds to do that. You can use foundation funds to do that. Those are all fair game. Now, when we get into the lobbying piece, see if I can make this work. There we go. Lobbying and partisan political activities. That's where, while those are still considered advocacy, those are areas where there are regulations and laws that limit how much you can do of that, depending on what funding you use and what tax status you are as an organization. So let's get into those. So this lobbying definition is very specific. There's two types, direct and grassroots. So direct lobbying has to have these three, it's really three to four factors. It has to be some type of communication. So that could be an email, a phone call, a visit, a letter, a postcard, a tweet, a Facebook post, a poster, some kind of communication, a conversation. And then that communication has to be directed to a legislator, and we're going to talk about what the definition of a legislator is. That includes their staff, that's elected officials at the local, state, and federal level, and also executive positions, so like in the political appointees in the Federal Department of Education. And then it has to express a view about a specific piece of legislation. So it has to take a stand, like saying, yes, we support this, or no, oppose this, or strengthen this, or whatever. It has to have some kind of opinion about a piece of legislation, and then it has to be about a specific piece of legislation or program. So 21st Century Community Learning Centers, or the spending bill, that would be specific legislation. Grassroots is essentially the same thing, except for instead of doing it yourself, you're telling other people to do it. So when we as the Afterschool Alliance reach out or send out an email or an action alert, a call to action to folks in our database, to the field, that's us doing grassroots lobbying. And so we have to track when we do direct and when we do grassroots lobbying and report that. And that as a 501c3, as a nonprofit, those lobbying activities, whereas you can do as much advocacy and educating as you want, these specific lobbying activities cannot exceed 10% of a 501c3 nonprofit organization's budget for the year. So we have to track that and make sure we don't exceed that. It's okay to do, but you just can't do too much of it. And then the second question is, okay, if it's okay to do, what funds can you use to do it? So both for direct and grassroots, you cannot use any kind of government funds for that direct work. So if it has, or grassroots lobbying. So if, again, it's a communication to a legislator about a specific thing, so for instance, reaching out to Senator Hensey and saying, do not cut the 21st Century Community Learning Center funding, you're talking about a communication to a legislator expressing a view about specific legislation, so that would meet the definition of direct lobbying. So you, again, can do that, but when you do that, whether it's the time you take to do it or the cost associated with, say it's an email or a letter, the postage, those would all be lobbying expenses, and so you could not use government funds for that. So if you're a 21st Century grantee or get other federal funds, you cannot use those funds in your budget to do those. So if you're 100% of your salary is 21st Century and you're doing that during the working day, that's not allowed. That would be considered a lobbying violation. Instead, you could do that when you're not working, so as an individual at the end of the day, or if you get a lunch break, or if 75% of your time is funded through federal funding like 21st Century, and the other 25% is funded through funds that allow you to lobby, then that's okay. So let's talk briefly about what those funds are that allow you to lobby. So federal funds, government, state funding, all that, we said you cannot use that to lobby, although you can use it to educate. The foundation funds, so funds like, say, from a funder like the Mount Foundation, most, I'd say 99% of foundation funds, unless they explicitly tell you it's okay for you to use them for lobbying, you cannot use them for lobbying either. And so the funds that you can use are individual donations. So if I gave money to the Wyoming Afterschool Alliance, then that would be okay for them to use those funds as part of a fund to do direct lobbying, or corporate donations. So if you have in your program a corporate funder, say grocery store or Chamber of Commerce or somebody else that is giving you funds for your program, it's okay, depending on what the agreement is and what those funds are for. In the government's eyes, it's okay for you to use those funds for lobbying. But those are the main sources, individual funds and corporate funds, and that are okay, and then government and foundation are not okay. Questions? That was a little confusing. Hopefully that was clear.
Yeah,
okay.
You guys, this is kind of probably the most important point that he's making here is, so if there's something that you need to be clarified, this would be a good time to ask that question or drill down a little bit.
Yeah, we'll get in the weeds a little bit here too. So just to emphasize the communication, this is an example of so it's highlighted there. Hopefully you can see that. The direct communication, again, is what I talked about. So it could be postcard, letter, conversation, tweet, Facebook post, some kind of creative mechanism, whatever that is, that's the communication. And then a legislator is U.S. legislators and staff, state legislators and staff, county board of supervisors, city council, school board members. Anyone who's elected is generally a legislator, but also presidents, governors, executive officials, who participate in formulating, so political appointees who draft legislation, they all would count as legislator. And then expressing a view about specific legislation. So this is the federal budget, that's specific legislation. It's a resolution, not a law, but it's still legislation. That would count. And then this is to signify the expressing the view or idea or opinion. So even if usually most of the advocacy or the lobbying that we do is around support this or don't support that. So support 21st century funding or oppose, do not support a cut to 21st century funding. But there is opportunities to propose ideas for legislation as well. And so that would also count as lobbying. And an example there is, Senator Enzi also is on the Education Committee, the Health Committee, which is Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions in the Senate. And in that role, his staff has been working on reauthorization of the Career Tech Education Perkins bill. And part of that is, that's essentially legislation and a program that allows right now secondary schools to do vocational education, career tech education for high school students during the school day. But the bill that's being written that would replace the current bill, if it were passed and become law, would allow funding to go to community-based organizations as well as schools, and would also allow middle school students to access those funds as well, and really broadens the definition of career tech education. So employability skills, things like working together as a team, those would all count. So we see it as a potential, if that bill becomes law, another new funding stream for after-school programs that partner with schools, particularly that work with middle and high school students, to do some of these workforce development or employability skill work. So if you were to reach out to Senator Enzi and say, we hear you're working on this bill, we think that's a great idea, we think you should allow after-school programs, community-based organizations to access these funds, to partner with schools, to work with middle school students, then that would be providing input and on creative ideas on proposed legislation, and therefore that would also count as lobbying.
What about if you approach Senator Enzi as a person, like just a concerned parent?
Yep, that's okay. If you're doing it on your own time and not in your work capacity, everyone, a citizen of this country, even non-citizens, as individuals, has the right to essentially lobby. Then it's not really lobbying. It's really just, it's still lobbying, but it's doing it as an individual. So,
okay.
Yep, reaching out as a parent works.
Sorry. So if we participated and encouraged people on our own time to participate in a rally, that's okay?
If you encourage folks, it depends on what the rally is on their own time, it's okay. Yeah, so it would be, so this gets into sort of the grassroots piece. So if you're asking other people to do things, then it could be considered grassroots lobbying, depending on the nature of the rally. So if at the rally people are calling on specifically making that ask to legislators to do something specific. So if there are members of Congress at the rally and there are folks at the rally saying, we want increase or no cuts to funding to after school, then and you ask people to go to that rally, it's a gray area, but I could see that be considered as grassroots lobbying. But on their own time, that's okay. But when you're asking them to go, would have to be on your own time also. Does that make sense? It
does. So
okay.
In that vein, then, if board of directors ask or rally a group of parents or whatever to write letters or do whatever, is that different, or is that they're still doing it on the behalf of the organization?
They're still doing it on behalf of the organization, and you certainly can do that. You just need to track to make sure it's not more than 10% of your budget that you're doing that, and you have to make sure that the funds that the boards of directors are using, if they're doing it as a volunteer, and not...
Yes, they completely, it has nothing to do with any kind of funding, they just are...
Yep, then you're okay. You should be okay then.
Okay. Thank you.
If any organization, resources are used, though, for that... you could, if you want to be really stickler to the law, then the funds for those resources would need to be, not government and not foundation.
So, for example, if getting the communication out to parents about any particular issue could be done by the board of directors without using any funds.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes, I think I understood that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so this is kind of what we were just talking about, the grassroots call to action. It's telling someone, to anyone, to parents, could be, or someone else, to contact legislators. And if you're providing, particularly, it's also, so it doesn't have to be just telling them to contact legislators. If you're providing an address, telephone number, or some other way to get their email address, if you're providing the mechanism to do so, if you're telling them who their legislator is, all of those constitute sort of a call to action. What's not a call to action is if you say, learn more about, what's going on with funding cuts, and you're not having that direct piece. Even if you say take action, but you don't have the means to take action, you don't have a link to the legislator, you don't have a phone number, you don't have an address, those are okay. Again, it gets kind of in the weeds here, but you'll notice from materials that come out from the Afterschool Alliance, if you're on our mailing lists, sometimes we have calls to action and sometimes we don't. Sometimes we will say learn more or take action or get involved. And and it'll be like a couple steps to get to the actual action alert. And sometimes it's direct action, so it just depends on what funds we're using for that particular initiative, and where we are at our 10% in the year, because we go right up to the 10%.
Can I
yes,
ask
go ahead.
Really okay, so if we're standing in front of a couple of hundred, parents at a family engagement, and we're thanking them for their continued support for for the 21 CCLC grant and everything that comes along with it, and how their children have, this is such a great camp, or it's a great after-school program, and making sure that they know that it's funded by the 21st Century Grant. If we say to them in that venue, if we say to them, make sure and contact your senators to make sure that, we keep this funding going, would that be considered lobbying? If we don't give them, if we don't say, okay, here's an information page. If we don't give them anything other than make sure you contact your senators and write letters to make sure that they know that you want this funding to continue, would that be lobbying?
It wouldn't be direct lobbying. The question is whether it be grassroots lobbying, and I don't think it would be if you did not, if you kept it fairly vague, like the way you described it. So if you're talking about specific legislation, you're talking about a view in the legislation, but you're and you're mentioning the legislators, but you're not giving them a means to communicate that to the legislator. You're simply saying, please reach out to your senators, get involved, let them know how important this program is. If you were to provide postcards to that effect that they could fill out, then yes, absolutely, that'd be grassroots lobbying. Or if you had iPads or laptops with an action up where people could fill in their information and send, that would be definitely grassroots lobbying. But if you don't have the means for them to actually do it and you're relying on them to do it on their own time to go home, then you're fine.
I imagine I'd probably get some questions, though, while they were still there. Well, how can I help? What can I do? So I don't know if I would want to go that direction, but I always, thank them for their support, their continued support for the 21 CCLC grant. So I'm glad that's not lobbying.
Yeah, that's okay. That's fine. And even, making sure they know where the funding comes from and how the process works, and encouraging them to learn more. Say if this program is valuable to you, this is a federal program, and like any federal program, the funding is never certain. And please, learn more, get involved, find out more information about how this works, and we're happy to, point you to information on it.
I'm even making little buttons that say the after-school program is funded by the 21 CCLC grant, the 21st Century grant. So I can pass those out.
That's okay.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Could they have a prepared fact sheet on their program? This is how many kids we serve. Here's the amount of money that we receive from the federal government for this. Please take time to, just somehow giving them the tools or the ammunition, and then you could say it's really important you get involved or something like that. I don't know. Would that be?
Yeah, that's okay as long as you don't have that direct call to action on there that says, here's the phone number, go call Senator NC now. But if you have, about the program, how it works, how the funding works, and even links to, the Wyoming Afterschool Alliance or other pages that talk about more about the program, and there may be a call to action on the Wyoming Alliance page, but as long as that's sort of 2 steps to get there, then that actual piece of paper is okay. But if it's a direct link on the piece of paper to an action alert, then you wouldn't be able to do that. It has to be a general page.
Was that Elisa? Who was that, or was that Yvonne? Who was talking just now?
That was me. That's Yvonne.
Oh, okay, great, thanks.
I'm almost done here, and I know we're getting up near 2, but so there, as we just talked about, there's sometimes lobbying restrictions on organizational funds or on your program funds, which means you can't do that direct piece or can't meet with legislators. So here's a couple of ideas. Otherwise, just educating them on the better. You guys are running these programs; they're not. Sometimes staff have never even been to a program. So just, again, showing them, inviting them to come out and show them what it looks like, how it works, how the funding flows, what you have to do to manage the grant, which is a tremendous amount of work, and the uncertainty that it's a 3 to 5 year grant and that you may not have it, and what that means to the community, just the ins and outs, and most importantly, the impact on the kids and the parents, and having them speak about why they like the program. And just getting to know, have that relationship, build that relationship with them so that if they have questions, reaching out and saying, we run this program in your community, it's having great impact. If you have any questions, if anything comes up that, how the program works, being a resource to them is key. And then, again, empowering communities and constituents. So the exact stuff that you guys were talking about, making sure parents know where the funding comes from, is empowering folks. And, with students, too, there's a line there, but we know lots of programs that, civic education is important. And so not necessarily turning, students and programs into little lobbyists for their own programs, but using it as an exercise, particularly for middle and high school, but even younger kids, about how the process works, and the importance of making folks aware, policymakers aware of what the program is doing at the local level, why it's important.
So they could basically say that here's what will happen without the funding. Can they talk about the consequences or the results of, of that? Is that okay?
Yeah, I think it's okay I think you have to be careful how you phrased it, but I think it's okay to say, this is the need that the program provides. This is how many kids and how many parents, want the program, participate in the program. And if there were no program, we know that the need is still there. We don't know where that would go. We don't know, what would fill the gap, unless you do know. But if there isn't anything, that's okay. I think it's also okay to share that there used to be state funding and that, some of that state funding is no longer available, and that just creates more pressure for the programs in the state to, increases the importance of the federal funds.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So this is the last slide, but it's essentially, things we've been talking about. So as an individual, on your own time as a parent or someone interested in education, you can send an email. There's the link there. That's our call to action link. You could also attend town halls and speak to the value of after school as an individual. As representing your program, you can host a site visit or do lights on after school. Encourage parents to speak out and support. Write a letter. Encourage allied voices to speak out. On the letter or blog, though, be careful there if you're doing as a program director signing your name as a director of 21st Century Site, to not have that legislative ask in there. So you can talk in the letter about or the article about what the program does, how it's impacting students and families, what the outcomes are, how it works, and you can also talk about the challenges, the danger that it is being discussed for elimination. But you should not put in there, unless you have the funds to do it, you should not put in there the call to action. So, because of all this, please reach out to Senator Enzi. That would be going too far in that. And, again, if you're an individual doing it, you're not signing your name as director of XYZ 21st Century Program, then you certainly can do that call to action. But otherwise, if you're program director of a federally funded program, you don't want to put that call to action in there. So questions? Did I successfully confuse everybody? Is this sort of clear?
What are your thoughts if you were to go, any of you, if you plan on following up on any of this, or what's your thoughts?
Definitely, that was great information.
And don't forget, we can help you. We can help you word things, and help provide you with, some talking points that would help, send your message in the most appropriate way. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, and I should say, I'm not a lawyer, but we have a lawyer on contract that just does the lobbying stuff for us. So when we have questions, so if you were to reach out to us or to Linda, and if we're not sure, we'll send it over to Alan, and he will let us know yay or nay. Or what he does, which is very helpful, is make suggestions that, well, if you use this word instead of that word, then it's not lobbying. So because it really is one of those weird things. But it's helpful to have someone who is a lawyer who this is all he does is help nonprofits and organizations stay within the law.
Yeah, exactly.
Linda, we have registration coming up, for at the end of the month. We have registration, and we have open houses for each of the schools, and also we're going to have parent orientation nights for, each of our sites. And I think I'm going to go ahead and put an information sheet together directing them to the Wyoming Afterschool Alliance website so that maybe they can, on their own go there and hopefully find some of this great information.
Okay. Then we'll have to be ready for you.
I'll do what I can. I might go see Senator Enzi, too, while he's in Wyoming, but I'll just do that on my own time.
Well, I think if you can craft the wording, you can still, maybe that's something we can flesh out with Erik on, in your fact sheet somehow to discuss the impending situation or the existing situation that we have now, and still send a message without sending a message.
Make it more educational, kind of?
Yeah. What do you think, Erik? So she's doing something like that. What would be the best wording to include maybe the bottom of that fact sheet or something, just, informational piece?
I think I don't know. I guess I don't understand exactly what you're asking. So.
Well, I guess you could just put down, right now, the federal government has eliminated.
Yeah, well, and if it's for Enzi, he knows that, right? So is this to parents, or this is for parents?
Parents. If she's doing an orientation and
yeah, that's okay. To a description of what the situation is right now. So this program is made possible in part through 21st Century Community Learning Center funds. Congress is currently, debating the future of whether to continue funding this program either at the current level or at all. To learn more about, this process, see Wyoming Afterschool Alliance or something like that.
Yeah, that's just educating, right? That's like educating them.
That's just letting them know what's going on. Yep. And then on the Wyoming Alliance Afterschool Alliance page, if you could have things like the chart that shows the impact. You can have something about why 21st Century is effective, and you can also have a call to action on there.
Now, if I sent this out in an email and I just had a link to the Wyoming Afterschool Alliance, that's not lobbying, right?
It's not, unless the Wyoming Afterschool Alliance front main page had a big, we've done this sometime with our website, where we've turned our front page of our website, when the President's budget came out. The first thing and the only thing you saw was the direct link to contact a member of Congress. That became lobbying. So we don't do that very often. But as long as the Wyoming page wasn't like that, it's okay if it had it somewhere on the page, as long as it's not like the very first thing you see.
Okay.
That's our lawyer's opinion.
This is really detailed.
On this. We asked our lawyer about that. So he said, look, if you just have a box somewhere that says Contact Congress on your webpage, you're okay. But if it's the very first thing, it's like right smack dab in the middle, which sometimes we want to do that, that's okay, but we need to keep track of when we do that, because anytime we send folks to our page, then we're essentially doing grassroots lobbying.
So we could have a spot on our homepage that talks about, we could just call it Advocacy.
Yep.
Or something like that. Okay.
That works. The last thing I'll say, too, is, we've talked a little bit about Senator Enzi and his role in the Budget Committee, on the Education Committee, and with the Career Tech Ed. So definitely continue to reach out and build that relationship. All of you, he knows Linda very well, and he knows Tamara now very well, and his staff do. But the more voices he hears from in the state, the better. You guys definitely have his attention from the letter that was sent and from the emails that have been sent this year. Tamara, and I can defer to you because I was in the meeting. I know you went with Jillian on our team, and in June when you were in D.C., but also met with Congresswoman Cheney. And I think, my understanding of that was a really positive meeting, and that there's a lot of, at least at the staff level, interest and support and knowledge about 21st century and after school that they've heard from folks. And so continuing, that she's not on the Appropriations Committee at this point, but you never know if she might be in the future, and she still has a voice to reach out to her peers. So, we see her as a potential champion down the road, so you guys just keep working on her.
Yeah, that was really, I was most impressed with the knowledge level of the staff person that I spoke with. But, they definitely seem to have a really good handle on, it wasn't at all like, oh, we don't even really know what this is. She knew exactly, and definitely I think that would be, if there's channels to pursue Cheney, that would definitely be a good person to stay in contact with.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Would it be, so if you used wording such as a program director, their program directors, if they were to say, we're really worried about the continuation of the funding for after-school programs, is that acceptable?
Yes, because you're not expressing an opinion one way or the other. Or you're saying you're worried, but you're not telling them what to do. You're not saying, oppose cuts or support an increase or maintain funding. You're simply expressing concern over the support for the program.
Okay, because I've used that in the past, and it certainly sends the same message. It's just you're not really specifically. You're just saying, this is really concerning. We've got a lot of kids in these programs. We have a lot of families that depend on this. We're very concerned what would happen and the impact of that on our state if funding was eliminated or reduced. And so that kind of statement is okay. Kind of.
Yeah, when you added the last part is where you might run into trouble. So if you stopped with, we're concerned, given what we're hearing out of Washington in terms of funding for this program, we're concerned that the kids that rely on, the families that rely on this program,
would not have access anymore.
Could not have access to the program, or concerned about their access to after-school programs going forward, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Would this be something? I know we also have our back-to-school nights and open houses, and always have information on the after-school programs there. Would this be something that you could help us maybe with a template or something that we could have to sort of fill in the pieces on our end for our local programs, but to make sure that we get the wording right?
Yes.
Okay.
I think we have something like that, but I'll look, and if not, we have resources and folks who work with that should be able to turn something around.
That would be wonderful.
Because I'm thinking that that's one of the things we proposed about 10 years ago to do, was to come up with templates for our programs. So maybe we can work together on that, and then we can have those kinds of things housed on our website, so that Yvonne, if she wants to, when she wants to say just check out this website, that they could go there and get enough information where they could do something on their own.
That's great.
That would be very helpful.
We'll look into that.
Well, it just seems like there's such a fine line between where it's okay and where we step over that line.
Yeah, which is why we, like I said, we call.
Right.
We're not sure we call the lawyer. So some of these
Right.
I would run by him for sure, and definitely the template we'd run by and make sure it works.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank Erik for joining us today. You've always, as always, Erik, you're a big help, and we really appreciate it. We don't know what we would do without you guys.
No worries. We're happy to help. I hope this was somewhat clear.
You did a great
And
job.
keep up the good work. Good luck with the start of the school, everybody.
Yeah, thank
Thank you so much.
This is
Thank
being
you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks so much,
Yep.
you guys.
Okay.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Thanks, Erik.
Bye, Erik.
Bye.